Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to These Go to 11. Once again, I'm Nathan Bell. Joining me, as always, is not Zach Bartles this time. Unfortunately, he wanted to join both my co-host and I on this one tonight, but could not make it. Instead, I have the incomparable Nathan Bartleball. Nathan, how you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing well. How you doing, Nathan? It's been a while. I thought you said the incompetent. Oh, man. Yeah, I know I haven't had a podcast released in 7 months, but really, it was kind of rough. So I'll take incomparable.
The students become the master critic.
Yeah. No, that was the other thought. I was like, that's the meanest thing I've ever heard Nathan say.
No, it was definitely incomparable. Bull.
Bull. Bull. There you go. Exactly right. I'm doing well. The summer is going by so quickly. We're already into July, and not even just into it. We're like a couple weeks into it at this point.
I know. Doesn't it feel like once the 4th comes and goes, you just kind of look back on the rest of the summer and you're like, where is it going? You're trying to hold on and grab onto it before it's too late.
Yeah, and as you know, and I know you have the school situation, so that's a little bit segmented. I don't have that except kind of through the kids, but as you know, with the kids, it even seems even more truncated because they're in school, they're looking forward to summer. And then realistically, these days they get out and it's really a fourth of the summer is gone.
Yeah.
Traditionally always considered the summer, as you start getting into late May and whatnot. And then they're out and, within 2 weeks, it's the 4th of July. And then there's a few more weeks. And then before you know it, they're right back into school again.
Yeah. So, now tell me, Nathan, because I know Maryland had this whole back and forth thing about we're going to start before Labor Day, we're going to start after Labor Day. It was we're going to start after, and then that whole decision was reversed. Did Baltimore County decide that they were going to start after this year, or did they reverse and they're starting before?
No, I am pretty certain they're starting after. Yeah, they're starting after because my wife this year is going back for her master's because my daughter will now be in kindergarten. But there's a week or two there where we're going to have to work a few things out because we were expecting them to be back in school, or we were anticipating they would be back in school because of flopping back and forth with it. So,
gotcha.
So I think they'll have an extra week or so. But.
Nice.
Their big thing is they don't know yet, but we're going to Disney in 2 weeks and taking them. And I've never been personally myself, and they have no idea it's happening.
Awesome.
So.
I can tell you, as someone who went much later in life, I didn't go until 5 years ago. You guys have kind of the all-inclusive thing, right? You're staying at one of the resorts, you got the meal plans, you got everything going on, right?
Yeah, my wife, bless her, basically made it her job to get the most ridiculously cost-effective. Showed it to me to the point where I really couldn't. I had no arguments.
Right.
I'm I can't really argue with that plan possible. I was like, is this real?
Yeah.
Did you do the math on this? So she worked it all out because I'm the kids grab your peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, we'll camp outside.
Right.
Outside the gate kind of person, which usually in the long run, that was my family handled things. And it always usually just made things more stressful and difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you have to do that, but I think that when we get to it, we will all be very grateful that there won't be a lot of trying to take nine buses and cars back and forth to get there, or trying to eat your Cheetos as fast as you can so you can get to the next stop.
Yes. And I can tell, again, as somebody who went, not only was the all-inclusive package thing great, but just as an adult going, I obviously I can't compare it to, what it's like through the eyes of a child, but I had a fantastic time as an adult going and experiencing everything that Disney had to offer. And I don't think I was necessarily cheated on anything not having been when I was a kid. So I think you're really going to enjoy it on two fronts. I think you're going to enjoy it personally going for the first time, but I think you're also going to enjoy looking at it through the eyes of your kids and the way they're going to experience it and see it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm looking forward to. We went a few years back when the children were both so young that we ended up leaving them with family members. My wife and I did go to Universal for like one day. And have you been to Universal Studios?
It was years ago that I was there.
Okay. This was post the Harry Potter world, which is just ridiculously detailed. I mean, it is phenomenal, and just how much. Like, even if you're not a fan of Harry Potter, just to see the work they put into it and the level of like world building and in building this, and you can walk through it and just how immersive it is, like to the point where, you know, even at night you can walk down the back alleys and the dark wizards are like down the back alleys.
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
It took a wrong turn.
Right.
You know, the children have wands that interact with the water fountains and turn things on and move things around, and it's just fascinating. That alone, there were lots of other cool things, but
nice.
My only thing with Disney is, like, now that I'm finally going after all these years, and it's not a huge thing because we're going really for the kids, but you know, I'm looking up all the rides that I remember seeing or hearing about that I always wanted to ride, you know, as a kid. I'm like, closed 2 years ago. It's like the Epcot dinosaurs have been taken down so they can put up Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah.
There was an old ride called Maelstrom, which was based around like Norse mythology, and it was trolls and everything, yes. Scandinavian folklore.
And now it's Let It Go.
Literally, it is indeed. It's a Frozen ride, and it's kind of disappointing because you can watch on YouTube. You can watch the scene by scene where you've got these giant mossy trolls that look like islands raising up out of the water. They were animatronic and giant polar bears, and then you see where they've replaced it with like Sven and Olaf.
Yeah.
And now that being said, I think my daughter will lose her mind when she sees that. But it is a little bit bittersweet. But they still apparently have the Peter Pan ride, and it is apparently still a huge hit. It
is, and that was one of my favorites at Disney World as well, at Magic Kingdom. It's such a simple ride, but it's so cool the way they've done it. You won't be disappointed in that one at all. I think that'll become one of your favorites as well.
I remember reading years ago, and it's why it's always stuck in my mind, is Ray Bradbury writing, like probably not long after that ride was open, how grateful he was to Walt Disney to be able to see the London skyline that way when they rise up out of their beds and fly Neverland. So I was like, well, if it's good enough for Ray Bradbury,
that's right.
I'm sure it's good enough for me.
That's right.
All right, man.
Well, so on that trip, Nathan, you are going far from home, are you not?
Yeah, there you go. Great segue.
Was that a little too on the nose?
It is fine.
Sorry, I just took a drink of water. Little pause there.
Yeah, I heard you doing it, so I started doing the same.
Oh man, but yeah, you and I, Nathan, we were doing some talking. We got together. Occasionally we still get together, even though we don't podcast as much. And it's like, hey, such and such a movie's coming out. Let's go and check it out. Or, hey, did you catch this movie? Do you want to podcast on it? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is, yeah, let's do it. But then trying to coordinate our schedules is a little bit more difficult. But
it's crazy because we live 10 minutes from each other.
I know.
10 minutes is an exaggeration. We live like 6 minutes from each other.
Right. And literally, like, we both have the equipment and the technology that even if we can't get to one another's house, we can literally call and still do the recording, which is what we're doing tonight.
I was inspired by the kids on the Walkie Talkies and Stranger Things. I was like, I got to get on the handle and get in touch with Wild Fox or whatever.
That's great. But Nathan, I hope this actually does become a semi-regular thing, at least, that we can get together and we can talk about some things. When we were recording together frequently, we did summer blockbusters, we did winter blockbusters, fall, and we have one movie that we want to talk about primarily today, but there are a couple others that
because you've only seen like one movie.
Yeah, I know. Shh, you're pulling the curtain back. Don't pull the curtain. Don't pull the curtain. Ignore the man behind the curtain. But yeah, actually, that's not true. Because you and I have seen two movies together. One of them was just an oldie that we saw with your son and had a fantastic time.
Yeah, I forgot. Yeah.
And I think actually I had more fun after the movie watching him get eaten by that shark than during the movie. But yeah, let's why don't we go ahead and just let's do, because I do want to dedicate the majority of this podcast to Spiderman Far From Home, but let's kind of rewind a little bit to a couple months ago where you and I went out and saw the movie Tolkien together. And what were some of your thoughts on that?
Well, given that like a few moments ago before we started this call and you said, hey, let's talk about Tolkien, I've forgotten we watched it. So there's that. But that's not a complete reflection of the movie. That's partly because so many things have gone on and so many things have happened since that time. So that was that May? I guess that was still the May that Tolkien came out, right?
It was, yeah. Yeah.
It was certainly a smaller release, and it's one of those movies that, like, I feel like it was counter-programmed against Avengers Endgame with the idea that a few adults might accidentally, like, wander into the theater to see it after dropping kids off or something. And they had been – I don't feel like it was super advertised, but I feel like, you know, I'd seen a couple trailers, I'd seen a couple things, and obviously, I think anyone who's into fantasy and also kind of from the perspective of anyone who may know Tolkien for some of his other writings or even some of his Christian thought, then there might be some vested interest there. I thought, as far as the movie goes, I thought it was okay. As a biopic, it was fine. It was a little, I will say, there were things about it that were a little bit better than what I expected, because I kind of went in. I'll put my cards on the table here and say that when I see some of these movies like Tolkien, or a few years back we had a movie Luther about Martin Luther and things like that. And sometimes when we get these movies that have been clearly made by a base that's very reverent of the source material or the source person, they can often be dry or almost play it a little too safe. And with Tolkien, I think it falls more in lines. I mentioned Luther, but it probably falls more in line with a series of movies. Like it's in more that vein of, like, say, Finding Neverland, Shadowlands, which was the C.S. Lewis movie that starred Anthony Hopkins. I think it came out in like 1994. Yep. And now, that being said, I think both of those movies were better movies than this one. It felt so. Nicholas Hoult, actually, I thought he did a very nice job. He did a good job. He's a good actor. Most people may recognize him from playing Beast in the recent iteration of the X-Men series, the ones that began with First Class. He's been in other movies. He was in Mad Max: Fury Road. I think. Nothing else off the top of my head, but
wasn't he in kind of like a driving action movie type thing? Didn't he do something with cars at some point?
Yep, Mad Max Fury Road.
Oh no, I was thinking of something else, like more. Yeah.
It may be. He's done a decent amount of stuff. I was also thinking of a zombie movie. I think it might have been. I can't remember, Cold Hearts or something like that, where he played a zombie who had started to have like some sort of, reaction. Like he had feelings and emotions and was starting to think for himself.
My boyfriend's dead too.
No. This was a bit better than that. Warm Bodies was the name of the movie.
Okay.
I think you would probably enjoy it. It was kind of a fun, light horror comedy, more comedy than horror. I think it's a G-13 if I remember. And he kicks off this resurgence of the zombies remembering who they were because he falls in love with a girl. It's Not My Boyfriend's Back. That movie was terrible. But he's been in some good stuff. I thought he did a nice job here as Tolkien. The movie, though, doesn't seem all that interested in who Tolkien is as much as hitting some of the highlights of what we know about him on a surface level.
Yeah.
So if you are someone who knows a little bit about Tolkien and you maybe read a book or even just an article about him in school one time, or have read Lord of the Rings in passing or The Hobbit, then you probably know just about as much as what's covered in this movie. Mm-hmm. And the parts that aren't covered, it's really hard to tell what's dramatically created and what is truth. So you get a flavor of points of his life. Of course, they deal with the moments when he's at college and forming these friendships, and they also have the moments where he's in the war. But the movie feels very episodic, but not in a good way.
Yeah.
And how about you, Nathan? What were your thoughts about it?
Yeah, so I enjoyed it to a certain extent. You and I were talking after the movie, and it really felt like up until the point where he got to college and he was actually delving into the language and the syntax and all that stuff, it was just okay. And they got to this part where he's at college and he's really starting to explore his love of languages. And to me, that's where the movie really started opening up and becoming more interesting, and where I almost would have wanted to see a lot more of the story. But overall, I mean, I thought it was a decent movie. I feel like it's going to be one of those movies that every teacher who teaches Tolkien is going to buy and use to introduce their students to him. Does that make sense? You know those movies? So I feel like it's a safe kind of wholesome movie. It certainly doesn't do anything to taint or even hint at tainting anything related to Tolkien. It deals with it pretty straight on. I think it does. It has some dramatic moments. I agree with you that the sequences where he's at the college and he's starting to immerse himself in language are the best in the movie. And part of that reason is it's, I think, the longest sequence where we're in one place dealing with one element. Yeah. We've got a romance story that kind of doesn't go anywhere, really. We've got the war pieces, which are very much fragmented. And they also are going to great lengths to tie those in. This is also kind of a nitpick for me with a lot of these biopics is when someone has written a great novel. Granted, of course, we can see mirrors between what he ultimately writes that forms the Lord of the Rings trilogy and his experiences in the war. But the movie ties such neat bows that we see dragons breathing fire, and then these, of course, become the fires over top the trenches in World War I. So those images are there, but they're tied up so nicely that it's hard to get an emotional handle on the war. So the sequences where he's at college and he's doing this thing that really all of this other stuff sprang out of, Yeah. That the histories of Middle Earth sprang out of his love of language and his desire to delve into that. So that's what was interesting to me, because we were seeing the genesis of something we don't often see in movies like this. A movie that takes the time to be about language can be interesting because no movie often takes the time to be about language. It helped, too, that Derek Jacobi was playing the professor that he was bonding with, sort of his mentor, who's also obviously a great actor. But just as that story starts to take off, just as we're really just enjoying the kind of languid rhythms of the movie, because it's slow for a while, and one could argue that it's slow in those sequences, but there it gets a certain rhythm that is just sort of that works. And then somebody runs into the campus courtyard and screams war, and then the movie loses its way again. Yeah. And for me, I think that's the biggest problem with the movie is I think it could have been something better than what it was. Like, I saw the moments and I saw the potential in the movie to bring it to that Shadowlands or to bring it to that Finding Neverland quality, but it for whatever reason they chose to go a different direction, and it couldn't find its way into that category of the movie.
It wanted to imply his relationships more than latch onto them, which was not what Shadowlands and Finding Neverland did. They based those movies around relationships that these authors had, and then let everything else spring from there. And so I think that was part of it. But I agree with you. Part of the problem with the movie is it's good enough to make you wish it was a lot better. Yeah.
And we've talked before on the podcasts about those types of movies. You know, in some ways, it doesn't make the movie horrible, but in some ways it does, because you're like, man, I see the embers of a really good story and a really good movie, and you just snuffed about on me before you brought it to me. So, yeah.
That being said, the last thing I will say is the film is it a PG-13? If it is, it's a very mild PG-13. And if you've got if you have somebody who's younger who is would be interested in Tolkien, or has maybe read some of the Lord of the Rings, I think it's a fine movie. It really there's nothing wrong with it, and there are some things that are right with it. It's just like you said. I think that we're holding it to this standard because no one's really made a Tolkien movie before, and I think that Tolkien, deserves a good movie. So a sort of all right movie is a waste of the resources.
Yeah, exactly. And just on that note, real quick, you were saying about bringing children. If your kids have already seen Lord of the Rings, there is nothing over the top in this that they wouldn't have seen in that. So.
Yeah, the war scenes are handled well. There is of course the intimation of what's going on there, and there is some the toll of war is shown, but we're not talking about extremely graphic scenes. Yep,
exactly. So Nathan, we moved from May and we moved into June, where we went and saw an oldie but a goodie, Jaws.
An oldie but a greatie, really.
And we went with a special guest, one Johnny Bartleball, and he's seen Jaws before, correct?
I had managed to get it's been a point of contention. So we went. Nathan and I went to the Senator here in Baltimore, of York Road, which is one of the last few great movie houses that are really left standing probably across the country. It's in the historic registry and everything, and it's probably one of the best places I can think of to go see a movie, particularly where we are. And it's added on small theaters, but it still has this big main theater, and it does revive. It's been for the past 5 or 6 years been doing revivals of classic movies. So we've been to see Planet of the Apes there, and Big Trouble in Little China, and things like that. And they've done Jaws, I think, every year. They do Jaws every year around the 4th of July for the past 3 years, including this one. And the past one, I was trying to get my wife, let me take John to see Jaws, and it was no, we're going to the beach, we can't do this. He's not going to handle it. He'd seen some other movies, and he's 7, so he's 7, he was 6 last year, and it's a little young, but I'm kind of skewed because I saw a lot of these things very young, Yep. And we ended up taking him to go see The Meg last summer, which is of course just total ridiculousness, but they handled that. And I was able to sort of leverage the fact that Meg is a PG-13 and Jaws is a PG.
Right.
This is probably not the best leverage. And so I was able to finagle it after we went to the beach. We did show the kids Jaws. And it's so funny because they're so used to sophisticated special effects now that Jaws just seems second rate. I believe Johnny may have actually said this isn't as scary as the Meg at that point in time, which was kind of just kind of drove a like a stake into my heart. I was like,
Right.
oh no, we're gonna have to work on this. Now that being said, so we go and we see this in the Senator Theater on this giant screen, and the moment when the boat, there's a moment where Richard Dreyfuss has gone down into the water to inspect the boat, and this kind of bloated dead body sort of just bumps up against out of the hull, the broken hull of the ship, and he jumped from his seat into my lap. So
Yeah.
I don't know if we're still in the arena of that's not as scary as Meg
Right.
anymore.
Oh man, and it really it was a great fun time. I mean, going to the Senator is always great, and seeing these old movies come back to life, because there is that feeling of, man, this is what it was like. We're going to do a Stranger Things 3 episode in a few weeks here with Zach Bartles and you and me. We're going to sit down and we're going to talk about that. And we're going to have a lot to say about the 80s and that era. And this just has a classic era and feel to it that is unlike anything else. There's no, there's no what we would consider, high-tech seating. We're not talking about stadium seating here. We're not talking about reclining chairs. There's no 3D. There's no IMAX. It's just, it's a fun.
It has ambiance. That's what it has.
Yeah, it does.
Ambiance.
It does, and it's appropriate ambiance too. You're going to see the movie, and I remember when we went and saw Big Trouble in Little China, and the crowd was appropriately rowdy for the movie, and we're going, and you and I went and saw Alien together, and the crowd was, just appropriate for the movie. And same thing with Jaws. The crowd was just, you're going to this movie, you're all going, and there's just something that sucks you in and pulls you back to that time period of cinema that you can all kind of bond and relate to and just rally around, which is great. A great.
And
go ahead.
Yeah, a point to what you're saying is there are crowds. That's the kind of cool thing is when you go in, you kind of have to find a seat, which is neat for a movie that's 40 some years old, as Jaws is. And you're right. I remember talking about Jaws. Jaws was one of the first things we talked about when we did the old podcast, when we did Pop Culture Ninja. If you remember, we did that whole Spielberg series in the summer. I think the BFG was coming out at the time, and talking about Jaws then and then be able to re-see it, it's still such a great movie. And it's a great movie without any of the things that currently pop up in current summer movies.
Yes.
Even Spielberg's not making movies like this anymore. And it's so hard to pin that movie down as any one genre. Like, you come to it and you think horror film, but it's not really a horror movie. It's kind of this Ernest Hemingway guys versus nature movie for a chunk of it.
Yep.
It's a suspense movie for another part of it. It's just, and it was cool to see it with my son, because even though, we'd watch it at home, I think he, in a way, he was just seeing it. You could kind of watch him and realize he was just getting it in a sense. Like you noticed him, he was on the edge of his seat. He was into everything, not just the scenes with the shark, but the scene he's laughing along with the guys on the boat.
Yes.
And Dreyfuss crunching the cup, his plastic cup after Quint smashes his beer can, and like his look on his face. My favorite scene in the movie is when those barrels bounce back up on top of the water, and we're watching them bob along a few feet in front of the boat, and which is the only representation you have in that moment of the shark.
Yeah.
So you're watching. It's kind of has this majesty to it, even though there's no shark on screen. You've just got a couple bouncing barrels, and that was something that Spielberg was so good at, I think, evoking wonder through something kind of mundane. He did it in Close Encounters with the truck shaking on the railroad tracks, and even the glass of water in Jurassic Park, and it made me really pine for the Spielberg of yore.
Right.
Not that he makes bad movies now, but I just feel like there was a pinnacle there of time. And for anyone who lives in the area or is remotely close to be able to visit the Senator, next week they're showing the Poseidon Adventure.
Yes.
And I think I'm going to get his mom to take him to see that because that's her favorite movie. Izzy has already informed me she has no interest. She was bored the first time. So, but she's a little bit younger. But and then Close Encounters will be the end of the summer too. So
nice. And one of the cool things about the Senator, just so people are aware, there are tons of really cool restaurants around this area. You can buy food and bring it into the Senator. They allow you to do that, like meals. They have tables in the back that you can set up and do that. But so just so people are aware, that
there's a great burger place right next to it, a Canadian burger place called the Clark Burger.
Yeah.
It does like poutine with like cheese curds and gravy and fries. It's pretty awesome. And milkshakes, both alcoholic and non.
Yep. So yeah, definitely. If you are around or you're in visiting the area, look up the Senator, check it out. It's off of York Road around Towson. So definitely worth your while. So, and Nathan, you and I were talking again, and you texted me because we had been talking about the AMC Premiere Movie Pass, and it's like, hey, have you got the pass yet? No, I'm waiting till the end of summer. And that's something you have. So I know you have seen a lot more movies than I have over the past few months. Give me a rundown of some other things that you may have seen more recently before we run into Spider-Man.
Sure. We'll see if we can do the 1-line or 2-line movie reviews.
Yeah.
I gotta go back a bit. So, I guess like after Infinity War. So we've seen a lot. We've taken the kids to a lot. I was telling my kids the other day, I'm like, you guys have done more in the first 2 weeks of your summer vacation than I did in like 3 summers worth of vacation. We do a lot of stuff, but we enjoy it. And the matinee prices are, I think around here the Tuesdays are like $5. So sometimes we'll take the kids. So we've seen a lot. We saw Detective Pikachu as a family, and I quite enjoyed it. If you've seen the trailers and the way the movie was built up, it felt like it was kind of building towards almost like a Who Framed Roger Rabbit sort of crossover hit that would draw in both like kids and parents. It's not really that movie. It's not quite that level of sophistication. It really is a movie aimed for people who know Pokemon and know the creatures. But that being said, it creates a really neat world for them to inhabit. The plot's not amazing, but there's so much neat little stuff stuffed in there. It's definitely a kid's movie. It is a kid's Pokemon movie. If you're an adult and you go, you'll be probably pleasantly amused by Ryan Reynolds and by some of the cool little creatures. My son leaned over to me as this world, as we get to the city, and he says to me, in Rhyme City, he looks at me and says, "I wish I could live there." and I think that's a bit of a success in terms of you want movies to be escapism. And I looked at him and said, I would too.
Right,
and this is the last thing I'll say about this is, and it's probably honestly at this point probably headed to DVD or Blu-ray or on demand, and not probably shortly at this point because it's been out for a month or so. This was one of the few movies where I sat there and I had to ask him questions, and he's filling me in. So it is a movie where the more you know about Pokemon and the more you're aware of them, the more fun the movie will be. But that's not necessary for the enjoyment. So I thought that was a fun little romp. Would I have enjoyed it as much had I not had my son there and my daughter who are into Pokemon? Probably not. But it's still a fun little diversion. And then we saw Aladdin, Disney's Aladdin, which I had no interest in, honestly. I like the animated cartoon. I will admit that I kind of find it a little bit more overrated than not. I, of course, in the 90s, like everybody else, thought Robin Williams was great, and he was really funny in that role, but otherwise it's a very standard. When you compare it to Beauty and the Beast directly before and The Lion King directly after, it just doesn't have the same originality or the same heart. At least I never really felt it did. So I walked into this expecting to honestly sleep. And we got into the theater. It was around the Memorial Day weekend. We were going for Johnny's birthday. He picked that as his birthday movie. And we were going to the theater to see this thing. And we get into the theater, and it's like almost 87 degrees inside the theater and getting hotter. And it's clear that the air conditioning is broken. But I've got all my family there, everyone's there, and it's like now it's about 40 minutes into the movie because it's like we're like in a pressure cooker kind of situation. We're like crabs in a pot, slowly getting hotter. So I grabbed the kids some Slurpees, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be a miserable experience. And with all of that being said, I actually enjoyed Aladdin. I was surprised as anybody. I enjoyed Will Smith as the genie. Mm-hmm. The script has given him a little bit more to do where he's playing an actual character and not just sort of the way Robin Williams was just Robin Williams. Will Smith is mostly Will Smith, but he's trying to add some dimensions and a few little nuances here or there. Mm-hmm. The movie is it is Guy Ritchie, which I really didn't realize until I walked in, which to me was also potentially a knock against it. Guy Ritchie's a hit or miss for me, but he does make it really feel like its own musical and not just a complete rehash of the Aladdin, the original cartoon. So this really does feel like when you take The Lion King and translate it to Broadway or something like that. Like there's a musical here with additional songs and additional things going on, and they actually give Jasmine something to do that legitimately makes her a character of note, and they change her story in a way that makes sense, and it doesn't feel like we're pandering it. Everything here worked with the exception. I was not a fan of Jafar. He's kind of like the hot teen model Jafar as opposed to this really like kind of malevolent sorcerer, and so he never gets any kind of menace. But otherwise, I had a really good time with it. I was like, not in any shape or form the best movie of the summer, but probably one of the big surprises because I didn't think it was going to go anywhere, and I think it's played out for them. It's really become a big box office hit for them. Nice. That's great, man. What else? Godzilla was a lot of fun. It wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, but it was a Godzilla movie. And there's another case. My son at the end, he's like, "That's the best movie of the summer." So it was great to see. The monster fights are worth the price of admission. The human stuff is utterly ridiculous, and that's basically what a Godzilla movie is. Right. That's not to say it shouldn't have been better, but let me ask you: in comparison with the first Godzilla that came out, would you think it was a little better, a little worse? They're probably on the same level here. So I have gone back and rewatched that one. 2014, and there's a lot of people that were disappointed because they felt there wasn't enough Godzilla. Mm-hmm. That was never really a complaint of mine, but the one thing that was true was they definitely conserved Godzilla until towards the end, and there was probably honestly a lot more sort of pointless human interaction because they just never paid it off in the 2014 movie. Yeah. In that one than there is in this one. I think people who really enjoy that phase of God, like 2014 had a lot more in common with the original Godzilla, the Toshiro Honda Godzilla the Ishiro Honda Godzilla from the 1950s, that original Godzilla movie. And then this one is more that era when Godzilla's, doing backhanded uppercuts and, this is the Godzilla, hero Godzilla fighting various monsters. We get Mothra, we get Rodan, we get King Ghidorah, and the way those monster fights happen, for the most part, is really cool. There's still a little bit where things are a little too dark, a little too ambiguous, and we always could use more of the monsters. Yep. But there's a good amount. I will say there's a little bit. This is better than the Roland Emmerich Godzilla. It's better than Michael Bay Transformers movies, but it does feel a little bit in that vein. Like this isn't really elevated from that. It is a big American blockbuster movie, but when the monsters go at it, they really go at it. Nice. Have you had a chance to go out and see Toy Story 4 or The Lion King yet? I haven't seen The Lion King. Lion King, I think, opens next weekend. Oh, that's right. Yeah. I haven't. Toy Story 4, my favorite movie of the summer so far. Nice. I really loved it. It's weirder to, in a lot of ways, I feel like this one is the closest to the original. In some ways, my favorite movie. Excuse me. My favorite of the four is probably Toy Story 2. Ultimately, I feel like I still remember what it was like to see Toy Story 1. And again, it was a movie I wasn't expecting anything from and watched it. And I was like, oh, it's computer animation, but, is this going to amount to anything? And just being so pleasantly surprised. And not just by how much fun it was, but how weird it was. The idea toys being worried about being destroyed by the boy next door, and the Space Ranger having this existential crisis when he finds out he's not. He's really just a toy. Like a lot of weird Twilight Zone-y things going on in this kids movie. And then Toy Story 4 comes along and kind of ups that ante where you've got this character that's a spork that this little girl has made at camp and fashioned. Woody has helped her fashion him into a little character, and he just wants to be in the trash can because that's where he belongs.
Right.
As he puts it, he's litter. And so there's Woody trying to convince him that he belongs with this little girl, and the depths that have gone on, and how they developed the Woody the Cowboy character extend here. My only one slight quibble is that a lot of the characters, more than the other movies, get left behind a lot in this. So even Buzz Lightyear is not in this as much as I'd like him to be in this. For obvious reasons, Don Rickles is gone. I know they tried to sample his voice. There's very little Mr. Potato Head. There's very little of the piggy bank and the dinosaur and all these characters that before sort of felt like they were in the background, but they were kind of coming around the characters. And they're mostly here as window dressing, which is okay. This is much more Woody's story than any of the other movies have been.
Okay.
But I loved it. I'm impressed that they've had a series. There was absolutely no reason to continue this series after Toy Story 3. Yeah. I mean, in some cases, Toy Story 4 is irrelevant, but it spends its whole movie proving to you why it should exist in a very unforced, natural, lovely way. So I loved it. I thought it was great.
That's awesome. Well, let's go ahead and dive into.
You're not going to ask me about Child's Play?
Oh, that's right. I honestly forgot you saw that one. No, I do want to ask you about that one because we were talking about it. And you said something that was actually really surprising to me, which was you liked it. And so talk to me about that.
Not only did I like it, I liked it more than the original movie, which for anyone who's listening to this is okay, he's off his rocker. It's a silly kind of horror movie, but it does things a little bit differently than the original. And I've always gone on about having issues with movies that just try to rehash a movie to the point that you're constantly comparing the two. That's a big issue I had with the Pet Sematary remake is I'm looking at it and I'm comparing it next to one another. This Child's Play movie, which the original movie dealt with a boy who had a doll that kind of came to life and was killing people, and he was getting blamed for the deaths. And in that movie, did you ever see the original movie, Nathan?
It's been years ago.
Yeah. And in that one, Brad Dourif is the voice of the doll, and the basic gist is that the doll is possessed by a killer, by the spirit of a killer. Yeah. So the horror of that movie is here's your kid's happy little doll, but while you're not paying attention, it's saying and doing horrible things because there's this very horrible presence inside of it. And the gist of the new movie, right from the very get-go, is completely different than that because there isn't a supernatural element, which is right up front we kind of realize that this is a doll that is a kind of advanced creation. It's intended to – it's almost like an AI where they have developed it. It's supposed to sort of show you love and show the child care and be their buddy. They're now buddy dolls. I mean, I think the Chucky doll was always a My Buddy. My buddies were from the 80s. I still actually have My Buddy. It's sitting right over there staring at. My kids have it laying on the thing. They cover its face up a lot. They don't really like it. But now they returned him to being, I think he was a good guy doll in the original. Now he's back to buddies. Buddy dolls. And there's even a song, You Are My Buddy, that Mark Hamill actually sings at one point standing over a child's bed. The effects that go into – so he's a robot that all of his safeguards have been turned off. And so the story that develops in this movie is about a robot, a small thing that – is imprinting on a child and is learning everything it knows about the world and how to interact with the world based off of this young preteen. And it shows how that influence kind of corrupts it and twists it because it's a robot and it doesn't know what to do. And so all the kind of comedy horror springs out of that.
Yeah.
And there isn't this kind of psycho killer. So everything that Mark Hamill does as Chucky is a little bit different. That's not to say this is a fantastic movie. It's not that scary, but it is a lot of fun. It does get gory. It gets weird. It feels like something that you would have discovered on a video shelf in the late 80s, early 90s. There's a leprechaun reference in the movie. And there are moments in this that would have felt at home in a movie of that. And yet at the same time, it's almost like you're watching a Black Mirror episode. So there was enough to keep me engaged. I thought Mark Hamill did a fun job with it. And it was really creepy to watch the doll kind of walk around and move. The things that are interesting about him are completely different than what was interesting about him the first time around.
Nice. Yeah, and that, it was surprising because I know, we've talked at length about, remakes and reboots and it seems like there's no, there's nothing original coming out anymore. And so it's nice to hear that even in a remake and a reboot, they can change it enough to make it more interesting or to make it more fun than the original. So. Yeah,
this isn't going to blow your hair back. The way I would compare it was actually to another movie that a remake of a movie Tom Holland made, Fright Night. Did you ever see Fright Night? About a boy who had a vampire living next door to him.
Oh, yes.
It was like Rear Window. Chris Sarandon was the vampire.
Yeah.
It was a really fun movie. And then in 2011, they remade it with Anton Yelchin and Colin Farrell as the vampire. And I thought that was a fun remake that took things in a different direction. And Child's Play's about on the same level as that.
Okay. Fair enough.
So, since we're on the topic of dolls, and it's been a summer full of dolls, I will also throw out there that if you're listening to this and you are a horror fan, the Annabelle Comes Home. I'm also astonished I'm saying this. People probably just think once I gave up my actually hung my critic hat up, I became a total hack, and I just love everything. But Annabelle Comes Home was a really fun. Like I have no idea why this movie's rated R. It's the perfect PG-13 80s style kids horror film. It's got a lot of really fun but not too creepy scares. It's got a great ambiance of late 70s, and it's early 80s, and it's really fun to watch. Basically, you've got the characters, the Warrens that were in Conjuring 1 and 2. This is more the Conjuring 3 than it is an Annabelle movie. That's just sort of the catalyst. It deals with with their daughter. They leave her at home, and they've got babysitters who come in, and then all these different creatures are unleashed. So you don't have just Annabelle. You've got the samurai ghost and the werewolf ghost, and this creepy thing called the ferryman. And it's a lot of fun. I really wish they had maybe changed the rating, because I think the R ratings is a little bit misleading. I think people who go in expecting a hard R horror film are going to think it's a little too mild. When it's really around that poltergeist level. I'd say. So.
Nice. All right. Well, here it is, the big one, the one we've been saving. So Spider-Man Far From Home. Nathan, just first impressions. Tell me what you thought. Did you like it more or less than Homecoming?
I liked it less than Homecoming, but that's not to say I didn't like it. And I think that the deck was a little stacked against this movie. You've got a Spider-Man movie that's coming. It's the first thing to hit in the Marvel Universe after this giant kind of both cataclysmic and cathartic force that was, Endgame and the Infinity War in general. So you have it coming after that. And not only that, you actually have it coming after Into the Spider-Verse, which is, in my opinion, the best Spider-Man movie they've ever made. Maybe one of the best comic book movies they've ever made. And so it was really, I think it was always going to be hard for it to live up, not just to Homecoming, which was a really strong, I thought, reintroduction to Spider-Man, but then you've got these other pieces that are going to affect it, and it's coming on the heels of that. So I did like it. I did enjoy it. I thought it did the job it set out to do. I don't think it was as strong as a movie, although you could see that the creators of Homecoming are interested in moving Peter Parker and his world forward, are interested in moving those relationships forward, and you do see things advancing. It's always hard to be the second chapter. We were mentioning briefly like Stranger Things. I felt that the Stranger Things season 2 was fun, but not quite as much fun as the first go round. And a lot of that's because you're trying to manage characters through a middle ground, through sort of a transitional period. And that's what this felt like a little bit. To me, this had to overcome some of the same obstacles that a movie like the second and third Iron Mans and the second Thor did. And I will say I thought this movie did a better job at that than those movies did.
Okay, fair enough. Gonna throw out throw it out there because I was talking with Zach Bartels about this movie. He absolutely loved it. Thought it was amazing. One of his comments was that looking back on like Sam Raimi and the original one with Tobey Maguire and that William Dafoe was in as Goblin, he actually really enjoyed that one, and he thought this one kind of did a good job at blending some of the elements that he really liked, but keeping it within this universe and keeping it real and alive here. So maybe we'll get Zach on for a brief time to when we do our Stranger Things one to talk about that real quick. But I will say that I enjoyed this one more. I really thought there were aspects of Endgame, and we talked about this before. There were aspects of Endgame that I thought could have been better and should have been better. I think they could have done some things to make it a better movie, in my opinion. I thought this took some of those ideas that I had and implemented them. And so I really enjoyed that level of what I thought was missing in Endgame. And then I thought it took it to another level. There wasn't anything that was a huge blowout surprise for me. I'll just throw my cards on the table.
Let's pause for 1 second. Are we going to do spoilers?
Yes.
Here or no spoilers?
I'm just going to say spoiler alerts coming up.
Oh, okay. All right.
So, we're already an hour into the podcast. So, I don't envision us going a ton longer, but I will say for the Spider-Man segment, if you don't want spoilers, go ahead and turn it off now and come back after you've seen it. The whole Mysterio plot line did not surprise me. I actually, if you listen to These Go to 11, I actually called what was going to happen on there before the movie was even released in theaters. I basically said, I think this is what's going to happen. I don't think it's going to be, any of the other number of things.
Let me ask a quick question about that. Nathan, do you think that was supposed to be a big surprise? Because I think, I guess it depends on if you know who Mysterio is, as you did. Because I think even before the These Go to 11 podcast, I think you and I were standing in the parking lot of one of the comic shops, and we were talking about this and saying right off the bat, okay. And I don't think we'd even had that second trailer yet, where he talks about the multiverse and all of this. And for the record, I think that the multiverse exists. I just think that Mysterio is, he's just kind of stumbled on it by a happy accident to make it his plot, Right. But I don't think that means that Marvel is negating the multiverse. We've seen Doctor Strange enter these alternate worlds and whatnot.
Yes. Yep.
But so that being said, I wonder how much of that really was supposed to be a surprise, because, it didn't surprise me. It didn't even surprise my son. He's like, he's Mysterio, the master of illusion. I'm like, well, how did you know that? And he's like, well, I have that poster on my wall, Dad, that says master of illusion. You're like, oh, fair enough. You're right. So the 7-year-old got it. So, and he called it I don't think those monsters are real, Dad. And really by process of elimination, this movie goes into about 40 minutes where it's clear that there's no other villain emerging. It's just these creatures. And I will say Gyllenhaal kind of they don't really try to convince convince you of anything else. They don't build any real relationship between he and Mysterio. There's a couple of half-hearted scenes, but there's not enough. The distance is always there, so you are to feel like Mysterio is just playing him. So when we have that ultimate reveal, I just sort of like, okay, like it's almost like the plot's just advancing exactly as you expected it to happen.
Yeah, and I would say I think I was actually more curious on how they were going to. I didn't think there was ever necessarily a question of Mysterio was going to be the next villain. My question was more along the lines of, for those of you who are listening to the buzzing, my phone was dying. I had to plug it in, so if you're hearing some buzzing, that's all it is right now. I was on 10% battery, so just FYI. But I don't think there was so much a shock value of, he's going to be the villain. But I was wondering if they were going to, if there was going to be this big thing, and somehow in this battling and in this partnership with Peter Parker, he kind of moves into this insanity where he becomes the bad guy and he becomes the master of illusion at that point.
More of a Doc Ock as opposed to...
Yeah, exactly. So that's more what that would have really been, I think, a unique twist for me in the storyline. Now, it's interesting, though, that you say that, because there are still a ton of people who are unfamiliar with all of these storylines in these comics. What they know about the comics and the characters is coming from what they're seeing in these movies. To them, this is the origin story. This is the character. There's nothing more or nothing less to it.
And I would say, though, I feel like even without knowing who Mysterio is, or even if he is if he's a bad guy, if he's a villain, they're still using that basic feeling of how, this doesn't stray so far outside the Marvel template that you sort of don't figure it. You kind of figure out mostly what's happening. And I was fine with it. There was a little bit of an emphasis where I felt like they might have been trying a little too hard to be on the nose about reflecting sort of the current climate we're in terms of, the way Mysterio is spinning absurd lies as the truth. I did enjoy the way they worked with that, but that it felt like they were sometimes trying so hard to reflect where we are that sometimes I'm not sure if it worked as well for the story, because I didn't really get a feeling for Jake Gyllenhaal as this real character. It kind of started to feel like Iron Man 3 to me when they sort of reveal ultimately that also the that the Mandarin storyline is sort of a sham. I think this was handled way better. I think that they did a much better job here. And I was intrigued by how they were pulling off that illusion and what was ultimately behind it.
Yep.
I guess here's my thing with it, which is probably not what most people will feel. I was really into the almost Clark Griswold-esque, like, European trip adventure angle of this movie. The interactions of he and his classmates, even starting from the very opening scene, which I thought was fabulous, where you see the handmade video that the kids have made for their homeroom. It's the thing that's airing at school. It's the tribute to the fallen heroes,
right? And
it's just with Whitney Houston playing over the back. That entire thing was genius. And then I think we had all talked on the podcast, well, why is Ned and why is everybody the same age? And it's like, oh, well, that's easy to explain. They were all snapped out of existence. Right. But Spider-Man does a really nice job of making that feel natural to the world. We started the blip, I think is what they kind of call it here. And you start getting a little bit of what the world has been like, even more so than what we saw in Endgame, of now what it's like when everyone comes back. And the scene of the marching band popping back onto the middle of the game was great. And the idea that, hey, some of these kids that were like 5 years younger than them are now their same age. So Peter's now got to contend with this kid who was previously like some little pipsqueak, and now he's possibly going to move in on MJ. And I liked all of that stuff a lot, and I enjoyed that. And I enjoyed the interactions between, I think, the Tom Holland and the Zendaya interactions between the two of them, that's the best Peter Parker MJ stuff we've had to date, in my opinion. And I love that so much that I kind of just wanted that to be the movie. Like, I was getting a little irritated because, to me, the Mysterio and the Giants and all that stuff, and even the Nick Fury stuff was not as interesting as what's going on with Peter, and he's navigating how he feels and his commitments to being Spider-Man. That stuff's always been the most interesting, but here it really seemed to be on a level where you got this movie and you got that movie, and I kind of want that movie to move more to the right. Mm-hmm. Now, when Mysterio finally reveals himself, and we start to get those scenes where he is putting Peter Parker through these really dark and kind of intense hallucinations, now that's where it really started to become a kind of comic book Spider-Man movie that I was looking for. And then from everywhere from there to the end, I was really into all of that. And it is a good movie. I just kind of I feel like I wanted them to finesse and merge those two pieces a little more.
Yeah, and I mean, I can definitely see and appreciate, some of that, but I loved it from beginning to end. The whole European road trip thing, like you were talking about, was phenomenal. I loved and Zach and I were talking about this. Ned and his summer girlfriend hookup thing was hysterical. That whole story arc was absolutely great. The two, and we'll get to these more in depth, but I really like the two extra scenes at the end. Marvel,
they actually meant something for a change. Like, I always like the end scenes, but lately they've been pretty lackluster. Like, you're just like, oh, that's a fun thing. Okay, cool. But these had impact upon the plot.
Yes, and so we'll get to those in a second. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think you're right in the sense that I wish they had spent a little more time developing the Mysterio Spider-Man dynamic, because to me the betrayal would have been that much greater.
You don't feel like he really quite knows him at this point. Like, he's just sort of trying to get this thing off of his plate. Right. And that's kind of what happens. And it's hard to buy that because of how much Tony meant to him, that he would just do that so sort of quickly. And I think it's just about as good as Homecoming. But my thing with Homecoming that pushes that one over is Michael Keaton was so good as the Vulture. And that reveal that they do when they're at the when they both realize who the other guy is. The other one,
that was so perfectly strong. Yeah,
and there's nothing like that between these two characters. There's nothing that really that makes Mysterio seem like this really engaging villain. He kind of does start to feel like just another puppet master, on the lines of Guy Pearce in Iron Man 3 or something like that. He's not at the level of the Dark Elves, I'll give him that. But and I think he had potential. I just don't think they quite get him there as a villain. Like, I don't think they certainly could have given us another really strong villain on the heels of Thanos. I don't think that's what they were trying for. I don't think we're really supposed to think Mysterio is this great villain. He causes us a lot of collateral damage, both for the world and for Peter, but I don't know that we're really supposed to be thinking of... I don't think they were trying to do another Vulture or a Green Goblin or something like that, but I kind of wish they had.
Well, and in all fairness, Mysterio, from what I remember in the comics, was never really that kind of a villain to begin with. To me, from what I remember, he was always a foe, but he was never the square. He was always more formidable, which is where I think they may end up going with this, because while it seems to indicate, and again, spoilers, that Mysterio is no longer around. It's a comic book, and you never really know. I think they might be leading to the Sinister Six. And so if they end up... I
think so, yeah.
That's where Mysterio was always the strongest, was throwing up the illusions to allow the others to come in and go after Peter Parker. He was never... To me, he was never the standalone villain that really was able to, take him down on his own. And so he was almost that weaker villain, in the comics, in my opinion. So to me, this fit very well with his story arc and storyline. But tell me what you thought. Let's start with that first end scene credit, because I'm itching to talk about that one.
Yeah, I want to say two other very quick things
absolutely.
first. One of them being like, if it sounds like I'm down on the movie saying I like it, I'm not really. I would actually put it. I'd say it's right on the same line as Homecoming. I know I said I liked Homecoming better, but I'd say they're the same quality of movie.
Yeah. And
then the only two Spider-Man movies I preferred to these were. I still really love Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. Yeah. I'm not a huge. I think that Far From Home is better than Spider-Man 1, the Tobey Maguire one. It's obviously it's way better than the Andrew Garfield ones. Although I didn't have a problem with Garfield as Spider-Man. But I'd say Into the Spider-Verse and Spider-Man 2 are better. And then you've really got these two movies sitting kind of next to each other. It's a perfectly good companion piece to Homecoming, I think. Yeah. That being said, the two other things, what did you think? What were your feelings about the way they used Tony Stark in here? I mean, we saw Tony Stark a lot, like not obviously acting in the film, but every time, which just sort of underscored that point that I think you had made before about like some of the writers that tried to say, oh, well, Black Widow, she's kind of behind the scenes and nobody knows about her sacrifice, but the kids put her in the video at the beginning, so people know she died. Right. So that kind of creates a rift for me. I'm like, okay, but then they don't do anything with that. We just keep seeing Tony everywhere. I mean, it gets almost comical because there were places where, like, was Tony really, like, we understand he sacrificed himself, but Tony had kind of fallen out of the public eye for like about 5 years after the blip, right? Like, he's living in so like, would he really be? Everyone's just bam, he's Iron Man again. So there was that. I did like I knew they had to use him in that way, and I liked the way they used him in Tom Holland's life. I really liked the way they brought Happy in and really folded him into the story and kind of made him the surrogate, really the real surrogate for Tony Stark. And I really enjoy the scene when he looks over and sees Peter building the new suit, and he kind of has that nostalgia moment for realizing how similar they are. Yeah. And so I enjoyed that. I wanted more of the Aunt. I wanted it to be more than a joke, like the Aunt May, like Happy Hogan, like back and forth. I wanted more of that in the movie, honestly. Yes.
Yeah, no, I agree. The whole Tony Stark thing. So let me say this. One of the things that I really liked about this was even in that little montage that you see at the beginning of the school when they're first opening up, to me was better than what they did at the end of Endgame. I felt like if they had taken that and put it in Endgame, I honestly, to me,
it would have been jarring.
Well, but there would have been. See, to me, the fact that there was more Tony was appropriate in this movie because we're looking at everything through Spider-Man's eyes, through Peter Parker's eyes, and that was his idol, that was his best friend, and so to me, it was appropriately Tony Stark. Because that's where we are right now. We're watching everything through his perspective. He's just lost this huge influence in his life that meant everything to him, the person who took him under his wing. And so to me, this was where it was supposed to be. I wish that they had taken it less out of Endgame, and I had no problem with it in here. So, to everybody who listened to the last one we did, that was my biggest problem. I didn't have a problem with it here because, to me, this is where it was appropriate for the character.
Yeah, it's fine. It's not even that. It's just that, like, after a little bit, it was like it's not the parts where Peter Parker is talking about Tony Stark. It's the fact that, like, every country he goes to, the first thing we see is a giant wall with Iron Man painted on it. Yeah, it's some of that where I'm like, we don't really need that because he's clearly at the forefront of Tony's mind. There's a really creepy hallucination that Mysterio gives him where Tony literally climbs out of the grave as a rotting skeleton inside the Iron Man costume. I did not see that coming.
Right. Zombie Stark.
Yeah, Zombie Stark. So there were surprises throughout it. And then speaking of surprises, that credit scene, you asked me what I thought about it. I loved that credit scene.
Yeah.
I had no idea they were bringing J.K. Simmons back.
Oh my gosh,
Jameson.
yes.
And that in of itself, if it had just been some random clip of Jonah Jameson, and the fact that they've recalibrated him, and I understand that some of this work had already been done in the Spider-Man PS4 game. You know, he's sort of, I think he becomes a radio Rush Limbaugh personality.
Yeah.
And this has taken him a little closer to like an Alex Jones kind of like conservative, like conspiracy host kind of guy on television.
Yep.
But to have him show up to bring, and I really like that they brought Simmons back, because I really thought I think he kind of got shortchanged when DC cast him as Commissioner Gordon and it did nothing with him.
Yeah.
I mean, he had almost the same amount of screen time in this small clip that he had as Gordon in that Justice League movie. So but I love even more what this scene is doing. It is upending everything. Spider-Man, really, if you think about it, is the last of the masked superheroes in the MCU as far as we kind of know it. Like, that's the weird thing when you think about the MCU. All the DC characters still have their personas, but everybody knows who Iron Man is. Everybody knows the Hulk is Bruce Banner, that Black Widow is Natasha. You know, there aren't any hidden pieces the way that there always have been in comic books. Except for Peter Parker, who's always been playing this game. You know, that's always a huge component, though, of who Peter has been, at least in the movies, is this ability to protect people by hiding my identity. Yeah. And a lot of the fun and a lot of the suspense of the movies is played out with, how do I keep my identity separated? So this is really going to be a kind of a different Peter Parker, even in the comic books than we've really experienced, if we legitimately have this continue where the whole world knows he's Spider-Man.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I was going to say is this is actually Joy really liked the movie. She thought it was a great movie. The only thing she didn't like was this end scene where he had the reveal, because to her that pushed it too far into the realm of Tony Stark. I mean, we've talked before, Tony Stark is not her favorite character at all, and so this just pushed it one side into that realm. Do you think that they're actually going to make him continue to reveal his identity, or do you think they're going to do what the comics do and find some clever way to diffuse it? Because I really think they're going to find some way to diffuse it, and he's going to come up with some way so that people don't think that he is Spider-Man. What are your thoughts on that?
If they're brave, they won't do that, but you're probably right. I see the difference here between, and I think that the connection to Tony Stark, because they've tied Tony Stark and Spider-Man in this iteration. That's been done. I mean, that was done the minute that he was introduced in Civil War, because he was handpicked by Tony. Right. He's always going to be tied to Tony, and as you just said, I'm okay with that. That's part of the character. Mm-hmm. But part of what's happening in this is showing the ways in which he's like Tony and the ways in which he's different than Tony. Mm-hmm. And he is a very different person than Tony. So he's also, the circumstances are totally different. Tony does this of his own volition at the end of Iron Man. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit of his own hubris that he reveals who he is. Right. He does it on his own terms. Peter Parker, this is the thing that underscores who Spider-Man has always been. Things are always being done to Spider-Man. Right. He's always rising to the occasion. He's always making the hard choices, but he's not Superman. He's not the child of privilege. He's not, he's the guy who's always scraping and coming up short a lot of times in all the iterations. He can't save Gwen Stacy. There's things that he's limited by and that always bite him no matter what he tries. And so this is the classic Peter Parker in a sense of when he grabs his head and screams. Yeah. After this video is played, this is a classic Spider-Man mess that he's now in. But I think the smart choice is to have him, no pun intended, swing into it and find his own way through it. And in that, we start to see the contrast in the ways he's different than Tony Stark. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it has to be an Iron Man situation. I don't think it quite is an Iron Man situation. I do get the connections. But again, I think it opens up a very interesting problem, and I think it does open the door like to the Sinister Six a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I loved it. I thought that it was a perfect ending to what was a pretty solid. We've advanced this Spider-Man storyline quite a bit in just this one movie. Yeah. We're not sort of just spinning our wheels, and I really enjoyed it. And I was appreciated that scene was another level of that.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely. And then the final scene that we have, where it's revealed, the Skrull are, they actually, some of them went off, but there are some that are still here. What are your thoughts on that, particularly in light of, moving into the next phase of the MCU? Do you think we're going to end up getting, the Skrull invasion on, that more classic comic book level? Or do you think this is just, kind of a, hey, this was a fun scene, we're going to pull Nick Fury back and we're going to leave? What do you think?
I'm not sure. And the scene's fun. I'm not sure quite what it accomplishes because it makes me think about things and it kind of falls apart when you start to try and think about it. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not quite sure, given the amount of threat that Thanos is, right, or that was, it seems odd that Nick Fury's when he hears that if Nick Fury really thinks there's destructive elementals on Earth, unless he just, I guess the idea is he's totally unaware of that. He's just chilling and he doesn't know it happens at all, but it just seems odd that he leaves these characters who are fun characters. They were cool in Captain Marvel, but it's not like they really seem to understand the intricacies of what, I'm not quite sure why Nick Fury has them there pretending to be him.
Yeah.
I didn't quite get that. And that wouldn't be such an issue. But through the movie, I kept thinking, Nick Fury seems like he's really in the dark about stuff. Through the actual film, it was almost as if the scene was created after the fact. The test audiences were like, why does Nick Fury seem so dumb? Not dumb, but almost clueless. And so I don't think that's the case. But then you have this revelation that, it's these Skrull characters. I don't know that we're headed for a Skrull invasion story. I think that Captain Marvel sort of probably gave us about what we're going to get with that. I don't think we've seen the end of the Skrulls, but the Skrulls have definitely played as sympathetic characters at this point in time. I think these Skrulls are going to hang around. Ben Mendelsohn's great. I really enjoyed his character in Captain Marvel, so it was fun to see him here for a few more minutes. I wonder if we're not going to see sort of – so is Nick Fury headed back to Earth, where I would have almost rather – I'm not quite sure the entire purpose or if I was missing something in terms of what this scene was supposed to imply something bigger, because it was cool to see him on that spaceship, but we know he has a relationship to some extent with the Skrulls. It would be cooler to see them maybe head off into space with the idea that Fury's headed out to do something out there. I'd be interested in seeing – I'd be almost more interested in seeing Nick Fury interacting with somebody like the Guardians of the Galaxy than seeing Thor interact with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Not because I don't like Thor with them, but we've seen Thor in this kind of wild out there scenarios in Ragnarok. I don't know that we get hints of that in Captain Marvel, but I'd like to see Nick Fury put in that kind of scenario.
Sure. Nice.
How about you? What did you think?
I enjoyed it. I'm with you. I don't know if this is going to kind of be a, it's a little early still to make a prediction on where they're going to go with this. There were a couple of, references to Skrulls throughout the movie, and then there was the reveal at the end with the Skrulls. And so, I don't know if they're going to try to weave it in that way, or if they're going to, introduce us to someone else that they're going to be moving through. To me, at this point, it's just kind of a laughable throwaway scene. I enjoyed it, but really, other than that, it was kind of like, okay.
It informs the story a little bit. It gives good reason. I mean, obviously, Nick Fury's got to. He's got to be a little bit in the dark on things in order for Mysterio to do everything he's doing.
Right.
So instead of oh, Nick Fury lost his mind, oh, it was the Skrulls. Although I really don't get how how it is. I mean, they make a joke. Oh, the shapeshifter was tricked, but it seems really weird that the Skrulls would fall for the levels of deception that happen when you think back across the movie.
Yeah,
like there's moments where Nick Fury's walking into a building that's not even really there.
Right. Right.
And I'm like, would Nick Fury do this? And then even more so, would a shape-shifting Skrull do? Like, can't they sense or feel thoughts, as they take? So all of that felt a little bit like, I don't know, but that's reading too much into it. It was a fun scene, and it wasn't. It again also had some bearing on the movie we just watched, not a ton, but a little bit.
Yep.
So I think it's about as good as we could probably hope it would be, and it didn't drop the ball coming off of Endgame. So I obviously I recommend it, and I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I would guess you're probably with this Spider-Man where I was with Endgame. A lot of people when I did that, I got a lot of flack. Oh, you hated Endgame, but no, I didn't hate Endgame. I thought it was a good movie. I wanted some other things differently from it to make it, for me, a great movie. And so I would suspect this is where you are with this movie, that it's a good movie. I think there are some other things that it would need in order to be a great movie.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I come down on most of the Marvel movies. There's very few of them that I feel, particularly in MCU, that are great. There are plenty of them I think are pretty good. Mm-hmm. And this is in the upper tier, I would say. It's definitely, as far as the Marvel sequels go, it's definitely one of the stronger ones. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people didn't love it, but I did quite enjoy the second Guardians of the Galaxy. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I can't think of a lot of the sequels that I've really, like the second movies of the series, except for Winter Soldier, that I really enjoyed. So I think that Far From Home definitely has a leg up on a lot of them from that perspective.
Sure. Nice. Well, awesome, man. It was good getting together and talking. We got a solid.
We covered a lot of
we did.
A lot of stuff. What is that? Like an hour and a half?
Yeah, pretty close. We're at an hour and 20 minutes right now. So
that's like old school. That's like some of the that's what happens. The whole you just encapsulated a whole summer in.
That's right, in one podcast. Well, hopefully we'll be able to make this a more semi-regular basis, and maybe try to once a month get on and do a podcast on some things. So, like I said, I'm going to pick up that movie Premiere Pass, and so I'll see some more movies, and we'll have some more to talk about when that happens.
Yeah, man. What are you going to see? Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark?
Oh my gosh, I really want to, but right now, when is that coming out? Is that slated
August
for
sometime? Okay, it's like August. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see if it's still in theaters in September. Then I may go ahead and try to see it. So, but
I'll grab you on a Tuesday $5 day. We'll go check it out.
Yeah, I'd be down for that. I'd definitely be down for that. That sounds like a plan.
All right, man. It was a lot of fun, Nathan. I will talk to you again soon. I guess we'll talk for Stranger Things.
Yep, that sounds great. We'll go ahead, and as soon as Zach finishes up, I think he said he's on like episode 7 or something like that. And my plan is to Friday when I get home from work, start and just binge watch throughout the entire night. So I should be finished up by Saturday.
Cool. All right, man. Take care.
All right. Talk to you later.
These go to 11.